Hello and welcome back to the dungeon for episode 6, A New Hope for Atrocities in Age of Sigmar. I'm Matt.
And I'm Evelyn.
Today we're going to talk about a couple of things. The first thing we're going to talk about is, of course, the Anvil of Souls. We're going to go over what we've done or haven't done since last time. And we're going to talk about the games played for this week. We had a couple. And then we're going to talk about Cruel Boys. We're going to do a little segment on them because they just came out and I think they're really cool and I'm collecting them now. So that's what I'm interested in. So that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, they're pretty epic.
They are pretty awesome. So we're going to talk about them. And then we're going to talk about something weird. We're going to talk about atrocities in the Age of Sigmar. And we'll get into that a little bit later because when I was thinking about Cruel Boys, they talk about a lot about how cruel they actually are and how terrible they are. But in truth, having a lot of the other
faction,
having a lot of the other factions in Age of Sigmar had their own atrocities. Have they committed atrocities? And if so, what are they? And how bad are they compared to, say, the Cruel Boys, who are by design cruel? And we'll talk a little bit about that. And then finally, we're going to have a little discussion segment and a question and answer. That'll be it. Unfortunately, there's not going to be a narrative for this one because I just didn't have time the last 2 weeks. I've been honestly really busy. I've been, not just have been busy, but I've also been sick. Not really sick. I had my COVID booster and I had my flu shot in the same day and it just knocked me out cold for 4 days. So, that's unfortunate. Yeah, there's some cats up above. We'll be right back for the Anvil of Souls. Welcome back for the Anvil of Souls. But before we do that, I have an email here that I got after we did our Day of the Dead episode, and it's from a guy named Connor, who's a good friend of mine. I just figured I ought to read it because it has a lot of good information that I feel like maybe we missed last episode. And it specifically talks about how the orcs would feel about Dia de los Muertos. He says, for the most part, I'm probably right. The orcs wouldn't really care if an Ardboy or Brute comrade died. They were weak, and Grodd doesn't need the weak. But, he says, I do think that some clans would honor the dead if the orc in question was awesome enough. He says, in the 2nd edition battle tome for war clans, it says that Dechapa's clan was once led by a megaboss, but after he died, a weird knob shaman took his skull, placed it on the shaman's staff, and then he said that the spirit of the boss was speaking through him. Unsurprisingly, all the orcs bought it. There's also a Hammer and Vulture episode about orcs sitting around a campfire that also makes me think that orcs would celebrate the bosses of ages past. And I do agree with that. I remember that episode and it was so good because they were talking about Ghazghkull. But I think that since Gaz is still living, it's more of he's still alive and therefore he's the greatest type of thing. He says, if an orc's deeds are great enough to be honored in their oral tradition, the story may be told over and over again and the deeds might just get more outlandish. And that I could get behind. Because I could see how at first it was they slaughtered a bunch of freeguilders and halberdiers, and then all of a sudden there was some Stormcast in there, and maybe all of a sudden the Stormcast general is in there, and then a couple of years go by, and all of a sudden it was a whole Stormcast army with a High Templar in there, and maybe it was also a city and not just a little garrison.
Oh yeah, it definitely sounds like them.
So yeah, I could definitely get behind that. And he says, for the Bone Splitters, I think they would have a similar respect for the fallen bosses or prophets, especially the more zealous clans like Drakfoot's. Yes, yeah, I could see that because they kind of talk to ghosts and they interact with ghosts a lot, they're kind of ghosty boys. But he says, I totally think they would celebrate the deaths of gigantic beasts that they had brought down. There was a whole list of mythical beasts the Bone Grins tribe hunted, and it would be really cool if they had equally outlandish stories about these adventures. I like that too, and maybe they grow in every telling, every tall story, it's a little taller. It reminds me of the Sun's Battle Tome.
Yeah, when you're talking about how they just start out with outlandish stories, I feel like they grow to equal or even more outlandish.
Yeah, they could get even more and more terrible as the years go by. Also, the Icebones, he says, apparently really love their war pigs. It would be funny to see them holding a candlelit vigil for all their fallen companions. Now, I don't think that they would hold a candlelit vigil for their fallen companions like the war pigs, but I could see them holding a luau and smoking some pig over a fire in honor of their...
Hey, I mean, you can't waste it.
Beats meat, right?
Beats meat.
I definitely agree with that. Connor, thank you very much for the email. I can't wait for our match next Monday.
Me too. It's going to be epic.
Yeah, it's going to be great. We're going to play a doubles match. We were supposed to play yesterday, but I was still feeling kind of sick. So I decided not to go in, just because that's the right thing to do, I guess. We're going to play a match that is 2 ogre players versus Connor and my cruel boys. And it's going to be very cool.
Yeah, I'm going to play with my old ogres.
It's going to be very cruel. This is what it's going to be.
Very cruel.
Okay, so let's get on to hobby and paint then. Well, let me ask you, what army or armies have you been interested in lately painting for play?
I thought with my brain about painting my ogres like a little more, because I know I haven't fully painted them, but I just never actually got around to doing it. I haven't really painted much other than my terrain piece. I painted
Why would you not bring that up? You actually did put paint on it.
I did put a lot of paint on it. I put more. It was a lot of hours.
It was a lot of hours. You put a lot of work into that, and it looks good. You're only a little bit. You're pretty close to finishing it. I wouldn't say you did a great job too. It looks great.
With the paint scheme, I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do, but it ended up looking really festive, and I was like, haha, Dia de los Muertos,
Yeah. What else did you do other than mostly paint that?
I put together my Liege Cavalos.
What else did you put together with your Liege Cavalos?
Oh, I'm so close to no, I did finish putting together. No, I didn't.
Nope, you sure didn't.
I'm almost done putting together those dudes.
I believe you have 7 out of 10 horsies.
Something like that. 7.5.
Yeah, so you're pretty close to getting those put together. And then as soon as you put those together, I will, I'll prime them for you so that way you can start painting them.
Yep.
So that's what you did. You know what? Let's get some promises, some hobby promises from you, the heart.
Oh no.
Hobby heart promises. What do you promise? What do you swear to get done by next time, in 2 weeks' time?
Okay, this time, I am going to get my terrain piece painted. I'm so close. I need to, finish some black and finish, a little purple, little purpley, crystal doodads. And then I'll be finished. I'm going to get that done. And I only have, 3 dudes left. I could probably get together those horses.
Okay, you're definitely going to get together the horses. You're going to finish that. Are you going to paint anything else?
I'll probably paint... I want to paint my Liege Cavalos. He has so many cool little things on him.
Okay, so you're going to get those guys together. You're going to paint your terrain piece completely, and then you paint your Liege Cavalos completely.
I don't know about completely. We'll see. See how it goes.
Hobby promises.
All
right, this is the Anvil of Souls. We have to forge your soul and paint it all. Yeah, she goes, oh, that's funny. I guess that I will talk about what I've been doing. I've put together and primed pretty much all my Cruel Boys army, which included a Marsh Crawler Sloggoth, a Break a Boss on Mire Brute Trogoth, a Beast Skewer Killbow, a Snatch a Boss on Sludge Raker Beast, 20 Gut Rippas, 3 Man Skewer Bolt Boys, 20 Hobgrot Slittas, and 2 Killabosses with Stabgrots, and a Stabgrot and a Christmas tree.
A Christmas tree?
No, I actually got I just got the new little grot riding this Christmas grot, like Santa grot.
Aww.
Model. Yeah, I can't wait.
Christmas grot.
I love those Christmas models that GW puts out. So I always get them every year, and I'm going to put it together. That's actually one of my hobby promises for this time. I'm going to put it together, and I might paint them. I might wait. And let me tell you why. Because I started painting the above mentioned models, and I painted all of the skin on them kind of at the same time. I'm trying to paint this whole army kind of at the same time, so that way, because they have very similar elements. So I'm going to do that, or I did that, and now I'm going to try and paint more things on them. Like maybe I'll try to paint their clothes or their scare shields, and you know what I mean? All red, all brown.
All their weapons, that kind of thing.
Okay, so I'm going to be honest here. This is from my heart. I've joined the Separatists. I bought a Star Wars Legion army within the last 2 weeks.
Oh my god.
And it's droids. Roger. The only thing that's come in is my AAT droid battle tank, but I did put it together. I haven't primed it yet because I know that if I prime it before everything else gets in, I'll probably want to paint it, and then I'll lose sight of the Cruel Boys thing, and then it'll just snowball from there. But I still might paint it if I'm I don't know, if I get drunk enough one night, maybe I'll just drunk.
Always works out in the end somehow.
Yep. So it's a droid army, and I love droids. It'll be led by General Grievous, and I've got a bunch of the battle droids. I've got the special armor battle droids, and I've got the little roly-poly droids that have the shields that are so nasty. They're like Jedi Taker outers.
Ooh.
They're pretty awesome. So that's what I've been doing, and that's what you've been doing. I'll save us all the trouble. I know what Renee's been doing, and it is not painting.
Well, she has been working a lot too.
Yeah, she's been working full time.
Well.
She was kind of sick with me. Yeah, so but let's talk about this hobby tool segment. This time, I've got the pegboard. I love my pegboard. I didn't think I would. I kind of resisted it for a long time. I don't like putting stuff up on the walls that aren't like framed pictures and things like that because I thought it might not look good or something. But what we did, we bought like a white $20 to $30 cardboard pegboard sheet from Lowe's. We 3D printed these widgets, although you don't really need those. You just need something behind it so that way the pegboard isn't actually touching the wall. And then we screwed the pegboard and the widgets into the studs behind the wall. And then after that, I 3D printed a whole bunch of little holders, little plastic holders for my paints. And so now I have 120, 130 paints up on this pegboard. Plus I have little bits like flock and little bags of stuff, whatever can kind of hang off of it. It's kind of like a hobby pegboard.
Yeah, like a lot of your tools are on there towards like arm reach. And
of course we had to put one up for Renee because we put one up for me. The only problem is when Duncan's Kickstarter comes in from all those paints, because I bought the entire paint set. Renee bought it for me for my birthday, but I just kind of upped the order to include all the paints because I wanted to. I'm not going to lie, I wanted to. I don't know where I'm going to put all those paints. I might have to expand. I might have to get another smaller strip of pegboard, cut it down to size, and then put that up to hold them.
No, you gotta go all in. You gotta get a full another pegboard, put it right on top, touching the ceiling.
It's already almost touching this. Okay, so this pegboard, by the way, it's like 4 feet by 4 feet. This is not a small pegboard. So we don't have another 4 feet to the ceiling. Hell, I don't even know if I have 2 feet to the ceiling. Well, I might have 2 feet to the ceiling.
So the little space next to the window behind your monitors?
Yes.
But you could move all of your not like your tools.
No, that's where the electrical box is. I can't put stuff
not
up
on
near
that side, on the other side of the corner.
Oh, where where my television is on the wall? I can't. Yeah. So I've got 2 monitors and then a television above it, so that way I can kind of like play video games or
work and play.
No, I only work when I work and I play when I play, not both at the same time. So that's the hobby tool segment because I really thought, I didn't think that the pegboard was such a great idea, but once I got it, I found that I wasn't all of a sudden tripping over 10,000 paints all over the place on every table, every surface, in boxes. It was just such a pain because the paints were everywhere and I didn't have a place to really store them, put them. It was hard to figure out where they should go. I have a certain place for every single paint and I know now not to buy a certain shade of red because I can look up there and say, oh, I already have 2 of those up there. So don't need to buy it again until it runs out.
Yeah, the big thing is that you can now see all the paints, and they're all organized nice and pretty. So you're like, I need a purple, and you look over, and it's kind of next to the red. It's in sort of a darker section. You're like, purple. Next to it's kind of pink. And we kind of get into like some lighter, like white grays. And there's like some skin colors.
That's how I organized it, and I love that. I love that I can look over and say, all right, let me grab 3 skin colors, or let me grab 3 or 4 purples. And as long as somebody puts them back after she's done with them.
What if I need them again?
As long as you put them back after you are done with them, then the system works perfectly, doesn't it?
Sure.
Anyway, that's the hobby tool segment. Suggestions for what I can do when Duncan's Kickstarter comes in? Should I hang a whole nother thing? Or should I don't know, steal some of Renee's pegboard over on the other side of the wall? It's hard to get to, though.
That would be mean.
Mm-hmm. I'm open to suggestions. Either way, we're going to take a little bit of a break, and then we'll get right back with Games Played. Hey, welcome back. We're talking about games played, and I'm going to let Evelyn go first because she played a game with her Bone Reapers, right, against Connor's Cruel Boys.
Yes, I did. So this game was pretty epic. We used the type of play where you would roll off for the map, you'd roll off for your objective, and a sort of twist, a ruse that each of you has.
So you guys used open play?
Yeah, open play. I couldn't remember what it was called. And we ended up using the one that kind of felt like capture the flag. So in the middle, there was an objective the map that we rolled up, one person's in the middle and the other person's on the two short sides. And I ended up getting the middle, so I had the ball first. The way that I set up, I had my horses in the middle, and then I sort of have everything horses,
your infantry? Your blocks of infantry?
Yeah, like my blocks of infantry, like to the left. And then I stuck a unit over on the right because he had stuck one singular unit over on the right.
Was it his Break-It Boss?
It was.
Yeah, that Break-It Boss on Trog.
Yeah, it was pretty funny because I stuck it over there because I knew that either he was going to move and be like, haha, you fell for my trap, or he was going to stay there and I needed something to block it, which would have been so awful if he stayed there. But so I ended up pulling that game out. I grabbed it with my horses and ran to the other side while, holding up my ranks. And my ruse happened to be that I could bring in a fallen unit. Neither of us knew this ruse before we revealed it. We actually did it. So I never figured out what his was. I guess it never became prevalent. But I brought back a whole nother block of 20 Mortek Guard. And he was, you see the despair.
Yeah, he took like two turns to kill the stupid Mortek Guard, and then you just, with like half his army, and you just brought it back and were like, here's another roadblock for you, buddy.
Yeah, by the time I brought that back, I have a feeling he had a little bit of a chance to give our horses, but the way that they can move, they have like a 12-inch move. So, and I have a feeling if I attached it to anything else, it might not have been the same. It was so nasty. Like the entire time he was giving me mortal wounds and like minus to hits, minus to wounds. Any other army, because my army I chose Petrifex Elite, which it negates one rend, only one rend. So like something had -2, then it'd be 1 from an attack. So like he had a bunch of rend, like his entire army had rend pretty much. But if it was any other army, I would have died.
Yeah. I feel like you play that game pretty smart, taking it with the horses and leaving. When you're the attacker in that case, which he was the attacker, you really want to split your units up half and half, because what you don't want to have happen is your opponent grabs that football, so to speak, and then runs to the other side of the board, and then you're stuck trying to kill off their whole army and not being able to because they have everywhere to run to and you've got very little mobility. You really have to set up like at least a couple of fast, hard-hitting units on the other side. Like it's fine to put most of your guys on one side, but you really kind of needed... I feel like if he had put his Sludge Raker Beast and maybe, I don't know, a Sludge Raker Beast and a couple of crossbows on one side. He had 6 crossbows, right?
Yeah.
So if he had put those 2 units on the one side, as soon as you grab that football, he could have been like, okay, well, I'm going to shoot 6 crossbow bolts at your guys with a football, and then I'm going to charge them with the Muckraker Beast, and then they would have crumbled.
Oh, yeah, those horses are so, like, they really aren't... I've never found a way to use them as actual hard-hitting units. Like, they do damage, but they don't do enough damage. I don't have enough of them, to be fair. I only had 5. That they really are good for either running up or running back. And another thing I think he did, which I wasn't so sure was very smart, is he set up most of his army first, because he had a battalion.
Oh, that's right. He had the battalion. He has the battalion where he sets everything up as like one drop. And it's such a... If you set up almost your whole army first, then your opponent can really look over and say, well, let's see how I can counter this and that and this and that. And Evelyn understands strategy. She will definitely take advantage if you set up most of your army first. She'll say, okay, well, all I really have to do is hold you up here and here. So let me put my hold up units here, put up a unit behind it, and there's not really much he can do for a couple turns.
Yeah, I believe that this was the only time that I actually used my Gothisar Harvester to its full extent, as getting both of my Mortek Guard units. Like, I stuck them together most of the time, and I really had like 5 rolls to see if I could keep these dudes alive.
The thing about it is, every other game that I've heard of, she was like, I charged my Gothisar Harvester in, and then he killed it. And I'm like, yeah, don't do that. Keep it behind the Mortek Guard and just use them as a shield block. And this game she actually did it, and look what happened. Like, he just couldn't get to that Gothisar Harvester with enough firepower and enough like troops to actually get it.
It was funny. He actually ended up engaging with my Harvester, which I was happy because, I do love getting that thing into battle. Once almost all of my Mortek Guard was done, but before I could bring them back, he managed to get a spears into them, and I was like, this guy has so many mortal wounds, and I mostly just murdered them.
Yeah, those spears are not particular. I mean, they're okay at holding things up, but they're not particularly great at taking things out from like full health. Like if you have a little unit of 5, yeah, they'll probably do, a couple mortals and then a couple of wounds and kill them off, especially if they don't have that great of an armor save. But that Grothasar Harvester probably looked over at however many wounds, probably maybe 4, I'm guessing, maybe 5 total. And he was like, shrug, okay, whatever,
Yeah, because most of my army, I found out, or I've noticed anyways, except for like my liege, has a 4-up save. Like it's a pretty consistent 4-up save. Not, even my Mortite Guard, they don't have like a 5 or 6. It's definitely a 4-up. But that also means that like they have a deathless, a 6-up, like kind of, oh, I'm not gonna die, which I guess is really good.
Yes, it's very good. So that was her game. I guess I'll talk about my game now. On last Thursday night, Alan came over and we had a game between my Cruel Boys of the army that I put together and his Slanesh. And it was possibly one of the best games of Age of Sigmar 3.0 that both of us have had. And I know that because he actually told me after. He was like, this is the best game I've ever had of Age of Sigmar 3. I was like, yeah, me too. It was super bloody. There were 3 objectives, 1 at each sort of corner and 1 in the middle. And then we had to pick a opposite board edge to set up on. And it was pretty much capturing objectives. What would happen, it was such a back and forth. Like he would charge in and kill some of my boys. And then I would charge it back with my heavy hitting units and I would murder the units that he just charged with. And then he charged my units with like his special character. And oh my gosh. So this is the worst part. We thought that summoning a Keeper of Secrets with that army was like 19 or 20 points or something. And so at the end of like the first round, he had something like 16 points because he was very smart about taking his archers and saying, okay, I'll shoot one guy here, one guy here, one guy here, one guy here. So he was trying to wound each one of my units at least once. So that way he could get the maximum amount of points, which is super smart. And at the end of it, he had 16 and he was like, oh, summoning a keeper is probably 16. And we looked it up. It's 12. So I had just killed his Keeper of Secrets and he was like, guess who's coming back, baby? And I was like, no.
Oh no.
Yeah. So his Keeper of Secrets immediately came back on his second turn. And that was just, ooh, that was wrenching. And so then he was like, let's see, what did he do? He charged them in and he killed a couple of my units with, he had actually a lot of heroes. And a lot of high cost heroes. Like he started with a Keeper of Secrets and he had Sigvald, but it was he was playing real cagey with him. Like the first turn he hit him. So the second turn, he charged him out the second turn, but I think he was playing a little bit too cagey with him. When he rolled for his charge, he only got like a 3 or something. So he could only 5 attacks, which is really unfortunate because having that Keeper of Secrets making him attack twice, super good.
Yeah, that sounds so nasty.
It is. Actually, the Lord of Pain was better. His Lord of Pain, it dished out some pain. Let me tell you, I had to kill that thing right quick. His first turn, he wiped out 12 brutes. Just straight wiped them out.
Oh my God.
Yeah, those things have, 10 brutes. My apologies. He wiped out 10 brutes, and those things have 3 wounds each. So he did a solid 30 wounds, most of them not mortal, to things that have a 4-up save. That I made have a 3-up save, by the way. I gave them an extra save.
Oof.
So yeah, he murdered them hard. And I was like, oh, that's so many points down the drain. Ooh, that was a hard that was a hard turn, that first turn. Anyway, by the third turn, we both didn't have a whole lot left, but he had summoned in a fresh Keeper of Secrets, which was, I had no way of pretty much killing this Keeper of Secrets. And he was like, what should I bring in? And I was like, well, you know what I've always found is really good in every game of Khorne that I played? He was like, what? I was like, summon in like 20 or 30 demonettes. Because summoning in 20 to 30 just bodies on anywhere, but especially on an objective, on the third turn of a game is just devastating to your opponent. It is so hard to get rid of those bodies because your armies are already kind of spent. You've already, you've traded your ace in the holes, and anybody else is like on their last leg. It's unless you're already beating them, which I was not already beating him. It was really difficult. And we played it out all 5 turns and it was super close. The thing that cinched it for me was that he let me have the first turn, which I thought was a mistake. And the reason why is because I surged my entire army up and took all 3 objectives the first turn. And then I said, come get me off of these objectives. And he couldn't get me off of 2 of the objectives. He just couldn't. It was not a thing he could do. He got me off the one in the middle, I'll tell you that much. He killed those brutes. That was the one I didn't think he would get me off of.
Those poor brutes.
And so for 2 turns, I was holding objectives and he kind of wasn't. And so at the end, even though, by the way, he almost wiped my army. I think I only had like 1 crossbow, what is it called? The artillery piece. That's the only thing I had left at the end of round 5.
Oh, God.
But I had more points.
Yeah, I mean, in my game, sort of coming back to that, but he also let me go first, which was like, ooh.
Yeah, I wouldn't, in a game with objectives, I feel like letting your opponent go first is just a good way of having him tie up those objectives, especially if they're in the middle or like in the middle of each sort of quarter.
Yeah, I notice it's a little odd. I've gotten let first more times now than I did when I played ogres, which
people want to have that counterpunch. They want the counterpunch. So they're like, you can go first, that way you get up and then I can charge you. But like in 40K, when they charge you with a bunch of units, they're charging units fight first. In Age of Sigmar, all of a sudden, when they charge you with a bunch of units, like if you only put 1 unit up in the middle and then you look over them and say, okay, their turn, then their job is simple. They just charge that 1 unit and they can kill it off with, some power units and it really can't do anything. But if you put your whole or close to your whole army on 3 different objectives and then look at them and say, go ahead, charge all my guys, it's really difficult for your opponent not to do that. And it's also difficult for him to do it and succeed because you go back and forth with activations. As long as you have a melee army, that is.
Yeah, I mean, I have a feeling letting someone go first is only really beneficial, I guess, if you have a slow-moving army, maybe. But his army doesn't seem very slow-moving.
No, it's not really slow-moving. Although certain parts of his army don't really move that well. It either can't move well or it shouldn't move at all. And if it does move, then he's kind of like got to take it in the chin for a turn because he won't be able to shoot correctly.
Yeah, it's funny. When Connor let me go first, it was really close, up close and personal. So I was really surprised. But also I'm kind of not because I charged everything up and he got like bonuses for it. He was like, if this dude doesn't charge, then you get like minus to something.
Yeah.
Don't remember exactly what it was.
Well, either way, the game that I played was just the best. It was exactly what you would want in a Warhammer game. It was close. It was just fantastic. Yeah, it was really good. Really good. And I think that the next time, and by the way, this was just Alan trying to explore the new Slanesh range and trying to like figure out how the new battle tome worked. I get the feeling, and me too, of course, for my orcs, but I get the feeling that he's going to be a real force to be reckoned with once he like gets everything completely down pat. And if it wasn't against me, if this army was playing against like say any other sort of person, he probably would have just like smashed them hands down.
Oh yeah, like I probably would have gotten smooshed.
He played very well, very, very well. So, kudos to him for that. Definitely. All right. I think that's all of our games played. Unfortunately, it was only 2 games played. I was supposed to have another game, but again, I was under the weather, but don't worry. I'll come next week, and then I will absolutely tell you guys about it in episode 7. So I think that's all for games played. We're going to move on to the meat of the podcast next, and we're going to talk a little bit about Cruel Boys. So we'll be right back.
See ya.
Welcome back. We're going to talk about the Cruel Boys a little bit. And I love that some of this information I got out of the core rule book, which actually had quite a bit about Cruel Boys, and then some of it I got out of the actual battle tome, the new orc battle tome that just came out, the Worklands one. First, I guess we should start with how the Cruel Boys were really made. So it all actually goes back to the Age of Myth. Gorka Morka was sort of rampaging around and doing Sigmar's dirty work, and the Chaos Gods whispered into Gorka Morka's ear that he was just like, he was kind of a slave. He wasn't really doing what he wanted. He was just kind of doing Sigmar's dirty work, and he wasn't really blah, 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 Chaos Whispers. And that eventually upset Gorka Morka and made him snap, and he wogged from across all 8 realms all the way to the world's, the edge of the universe, and then he just spat into the void. And then turned around to like do it again. It is said that the Cruel Boys were birthed from the Chaos Whispers in Gorka Morka's head. So like all the Greenskins were supposedly birthed from Gorka Morka, but I'm guessing these guys were influenced by these whispers. And so I'm thinking that's why the Cruel Boys are kind of sick in the head, because we know that Chaos is malicious. Chaos is twisted and they derive cruelty from pain. Pleasure from pain and pain inflicted and just all kinds of terrible things. So that's how it said that they were birthed. And we're talking the age of myth here. GW does a lot of revisionist history, but I like that this kind of does have a little bit of an inkling to where, to earlier things. Because we already knew that Chaos whispered in Gorka Morka's ear. Like this was sort of lore all the way back to AoS 1, where they were talking about how all the gods made this like pantheon of order and then how it fell apart. Even though it's revisionist history, it does feel natural, if that makes sense. So what happened next, Evelyn?
So a little bit later, they went down into the swamps, and Darwin's natural laws really went to work on them immediately. Every one of them who like got noticed, stuck their head up, or were like grew too big, were just quickly eaten, murdered, poisoned by some other sneaky underling or monster that existed there. And anyone who had anything that was magical or shiny or worth anything was killed for it, or they lost it in the swamp, never to be seen again.
I mean, if you think about it, orcs are naturally belligerent, loud, and big, right? Anybody who was belligerent, like too overly rambunctious, they pretty much just got killed in some way, shape, or form, because a beast, like one of the beasts of the mire, would look at them and say, something's head to eat, and then it would eat them, right?
Yeah.
And anybody who was particularly too big, then they would also get noticed, right? Because you can't really hide that well if you're that big.
Yeah, there's no way. Plus a swamp doesn't have very many things to hide behind.
Or alternatively, since they were cruel, they would be murdered by their underlings. They would be like, why does he get to be in charge? I should just murder him and I'll be in charge.
Yeah. Our orcs are sort of like that, something it's, if you're not the strongest, then you can't be up there, because somebody else who's stronger is going to get up there. Yeah,
but in this case, if you're not the sneakiest, you're not going to stay up there. If you're not the cruelest, sneakiest, stabbiest little son of a gun there was, then you're not going to stay the leader. You have to be the cruelest, the sneakiest, the most underhanded to stay a leader amongst these orcs.
And you have to live.
Anybody, it was funny because in the book, it actually talks about how anybody that had like glowing magical gubbins and stuff, they would get noticed, and usually their underlings would kill them to try to steal it, or they would just get noticed by a monster and they would eat it, or they would drop it into the swamp and just never see it again. I love that they're kind of rangy and have this like, I don't care attitude toward acquiring new things, because their stuff breaks or gets lost in the swamp all the time. And after a little while, they're just like, I don't care, I'll just make a new spear. It only takes like a couple minutes. So they make these like really shoddy spears that really don't do a whole lot, but then they put all kinds of muck and crap and like swamp guts and stuff on them. So there's like all this disease on it. And that's how they kind of do their damage.
And put like +1 to damage for that poison. Ugh.
Oh, that's so disgusting. What I particularly love is that what they'll do is they'll lure enemies into their swamps, or they'll bring the swamps to the enemies, and then they'll purposely disarm their enemy and watch their weapon go into the swamp. And then, have you ever lost like a boot in a like lake before?
Oh yeah, definitely lost a couple of shoes.
Like, you'll never ever see that again. You won't be able to find it.
It just disappears.
Can you imagine you're this like Stormcast Eternal, and you've got this great sword made of Sigmarite metal, or let's say a hammer made of Sigmarite metal, and you get into this fight with this guy, and you do a couple of blows, and then he disarms you, like a riposte or something that disarms you, as he like cuts you across the, let's say the arm, and then you drop it and he rushes you and bowls you over, and when you get up, you're like, where's my weapon? Oh, crud.
Uh-oh.
Wouldn't that be terrible?
That'd just be so awful.
I mean, and that's if you were like a Sigmar, a superhuman Stormcast Eternal. If you were just a normal human,
you might just drop it in yourself.
Yeah, and that would suck.
Oh yeah, it'd be so awful. I also like how they don't attack like a garrison or like something that like they're trying to get until they figure out how to defeat it. Like until they figure out how to, like, normally you see orcs, they charge forward, they impulsive almost maybe. But they don't really rush towards the wall to die as much as you hear. They will apparently just crawl through the muck and swamp and for miles just to stab a person in the back.
It's kind of interesting how it's just like, oh, that settlement over there, we're not going to attack it until we figure out how to take it down. And they'll plan and plan and plan. And there's a sort of weird meritocracy going on there, because a guy who, or like, let's say they're in a planning session and the smallest of them, the weediest, the rangiest of them decides, hey, you know what we should do? We should line the barrows of the bottom of that wall with some sort of sap, and then we should light it on fire, and then everybody will get woozy and fall asleep, and then we can crawl in. And their leader will just be like, okay, and they'll do that. There's nothing like, well, that's not my plan, so he's not doing it. They just don't care. They're like, oh, that sounds like a better plan. We'll do it.
If it's a sneaky plan, it's a good plan.
Yep. If it's the sneakiest plan, it's the best plan. And like she said before, they will literally crawl as long as it takes just to stab a person in the back, just to not. And they don't believe that fighting fair is something that you should ever do under any circumstance ever, because if you fight fair, you're dead. And that makes sense for where they grew up, what tribes they belong to, and all the monsters that are much, much stronger than them that's around their swamp. They can't fight fair. They have to fight dirty. Otherwise, they would never, ever get ahead in that swamp, right?
Yeah, like that swamp doesn't fight fair, so they probably don't even know how to fight fair, to be fair.
To be fair. And it also says they take a kind of perverse pleasure on destroying or beating up or enslaving weaker things than them, because they're like, of course, it's not sneaky enough to figure out how not to get beaten up, so we're going to beat it up. I like that a lot. But I will say they are a greenskin to be feared, because at least you can rely on normal greenskins to like charge you. I know a normal greenskin, it can be compared to a charging shaved gorilla. So that's what's coming at you.
Oh, Jesus.
But at least it comes at you every time and you know exactly what it's going to do, right? A little bit of variation, but mostly they're going to charge you. Now imagine this is an army of, say, chimpanzees with the ability to rip your arms off. That's how strong they are. But instead of charging you, they're going to sneak up behind you and rip your arm off from behind and then stab you in the kidneys.
Stab you in the jugular.
It's funny because in the Dominion book, they like lead around these Stormcast, including one of them that's like a Knight Arcanum, I believe. And they're just stuck wandering around in the swamps. They find like traps, and I think a couple of them get injured, and the swamp and things are eating away at their clothes and eating away at their armor, so their armor is all pitted, and can you imagine walking around and being led in circles for days and days as your armor, this harder than iron Sigmarite armor, is just pitted full of holes, and then they just come up and start sticking you with spears.
Not even like good spears, just like wood.
Yeah,
and like maybe something on the end.
It's like wood and a little bit of something tied to it, like bits of rusty metal or like shale or whatever they could find. And they're like, if it breaks, who cares? You just fashion another one in a couple minutes. No problem.
Easy peasy.
So they come up and stab you through this rusted armor when you're all super tired and trudging through muck and frustrated all to hell because, they've been walking around for days and days. It's just funny.
Yeah, I really like how they chose to follow Cragnose, because he's the apex predator that they think of him as, and they think of him as somebody who, like, you can crack open a shell, destroy some, like a wall in a city, for example, and for them to just feast on the easy prey inside.
How do you break open the shell of an impenetrable thing? But you need what's inside, but you can't break it open. You're just not strong enough. Answer is you lure another apex predator near it and wait until they crack open the shell, and then you eat or steal what's inside.
And they are sneaky. Seems like a thing they would do.
So they do follow Cragnose. They've got like cave paintings where they followed him in the Age of Chaos, I guess, and they did horrible things. He's the end of empires, right?
Yeah, and their whole thing is they're really crafty and intelligent about how they wage war, how they fight in these wars. Like, they really sneaky.
Yeah, so they don't actually just throw wave upon wave at the gates. They wait, they stay outside, they clatter their shields to make you stay up all night, so that way you haven't had any sleep and you're all tired the the day after. Oh, it's so terrible.
Yeah, that's a really bad one.
They use those scare shields to make it look like originally they were to ward off the predators, to make it seem like there are other predators around that are bigger than them. They use it just to scare you. And they put this bioluminescent paint on it so that way you can see it in the dark.
Oh, that's
so all awful. You see are the like nasty faces of these scare shields, and they're banging on them, and they're going and just making all kinds of horrible noises. There's an entry about the kiloboss on cat-looking like thing. It looks kind of like a ridge cat, and they talked about how the mount actually has the ability to throw its voice. So the mount will start this thing that sounds kind of like a hyena's laugh, and it'll be like behind whoever it is that they're stalking, and the person will turn around because they think it's right behind them, and then it'll pounce on its actual behind, and then the orc on top will like make the same noise, that half laugh, half screech, while they're pouncing.
Oh, that's just awful.
I love it. They're so sneaky.
It's so sneaky.
So underhanded. Although they have this really, I didn't think I'd like Hobgrots at all. I didn't think I'd understand what they were for. And I was like, they don't really make sense. But now I kind of understand, because they're an ally for trading because they trade with the Chaos Dwarfs for technology, pretty much. The shiny gubbins, guns, or crossbows. And it's interesting because these Chaos Dwarves, or they refer to them as Hashat worshipping Duarden, but we all know that's Chaos Dwarves. And so what'll happen is they get like the worst of the worst gear that's made from like exiles and blacksmith apprentices and stuff that no Chaos Dwarf would ever deign to use. But then they trade for slaves, right? Slaves and captives. And the orcs give them just the like weakest captives, the ones that are like sickly. And so they're both thinking that they get like good deals because they're both trying to screw each other.
Oh, that's just being sneaky.
And they have to use these Hobgrots as like intermediaries, because apparently they are less trustworthy. These orcs, I want to repeat this again. These orcs are less trustworthy than Grotts.
Grotts.
Yes, Grotts. Let that sink in for a second. These cruel boys are trusted less than the Hobgrots that have to travel in packs and are conniving and terrible. And anytime you mess with one, like 20 more will jump on you and like stab you to death. It's funny because the Hobgrots think that they're like masters of trade, and they travel in these packs, and they take all the shiniest gubbins from trade with the Chaos Dwarves. So the Hobgrots are the ones with like super weird experimental weaponry from these Chaos Dwarves that are made by like exiles and people that kind of don't know what they're doing. And the goblin's like, it's a living.
Shiny.
Yeah. So using like flintlock pistols that haven't been tested and stuff like that, just as likely to like explode in your hand as at the enemy, and like darts and stuff. Oh, that'd be terrible. They do give an example about why they're not to be trusted, and they call the example the Wars of Broken Promise. So at some point in the past, these cruel boys must have tried to deal with the Chaos Dwarves like directly, and then decided to like kill them after the trade or before the trade or during the trade, and set off a bunch of wars. And so now the only way they can trade is through these goblin intermediaries.
That makes sense. That sounds about right.
Yeah. So it's just funny that they're less trusted than goblins or Grotts. So you want to take the swamp boss Scumdrek, because he is so cool.
Oh, he is so nasty. This is a special character. Like he said, his name is Swamp Boss Scumdrek. And he has a swamp, but his swamp got drained by some magical means. He didn't do it. Somebody else did it. But he immediately looked at the roots of the swamp trees and said, "Oh yeah, I can imprison nasty monsters in there, and then organize a maze-like fighting pits and set them free, and then bet on who would die first."
As you do.
Yeah, as one does, and how to make a ton of money and teeth off of it. So not only does this guy have just like the nastiest swamp monsters trapped in between these roots and manipulates with pulleys and ropes, he lets loose battle captives to see how long it would take them just to die. Naturally, he cheats, of course, being a cruel boss with both claws.
Yeah, so This guy, it's so cool. He learned how to make his fortune through gambling and cheating. And so now it talks about how he also will, he'll sometimes tell the onlookers, like the orcs that are onlooking, he's like, oh, if you want to get a better view, why don't you go down and follow the captives? You can prod them along and maybe you can make sure that they get killed by whatever beast that you actually want them to get killed by. Because the bets, remember? And then while they're down there, while the orcs are down there, like prodding them, he'll bet with other orcs on which of those orcs will die and how.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Right? It's so cruel. It's so awesome. So can you imagine a whole swamp that's drained and all these cages made out of these like swamp trees, and there's just nasty creatures in every one.
All of them are like super upset. Imagine you're like in a tree.
And it's all like a giant maze too.
I mean, it'd be interesting to look at.
It would be cool. I really love this guy. To me, he stands out as my favorite character.
He should have his own terrain piece. Wink,
That
wink,
would be
nudge,
so
nudge.
cool. That would be so awesome. You could like have a beast come out of it or something.
Yeah, or trap a beast in it.
That would be really cool. It's good thinking, Evelyn. G-dubs, get on that. Immediately.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Yeah. And the fact that he's made a fortune in gold and teeth off of this,
I mean,
that's ingenious. Just ingenious. So I also like this thing called a marsh crawler slogoth. It's kind of a bottom feeder. It's a carrion eater, and it's super duper lazy. Even for a trog, like Trogoth, it's considered to be lazy. What it does is it just crawls around on the swamp on all fours and looks for either dead or dying things to eat.
Num-nums.
Yep, and it doesn't really care what it is. It'll still eat it. And so all the other orcs, think that it's not a very good predator, but it actually does. It actually will like raise its head up and snap at something and try and gobble it down whole. What the Grotts did, the Hobgrots were like, well, we'll just attach this rope around its neck with a really, really heavy rock on the end. So that way it can't bring its head up to bite, right?
Ooh.
And then they put a howdah on its back. It crawls around and can't bring its head up to bite them, the things on the howdah.
So it's kind of like a swamp shark looking thing?
Yeah, almost like a swamp shark. Because it can smell fresh blood from miles and miles away. And so they use these things to lead them to invaders, to people in the swamp, to anything. Fresh kills. I always wondered, I was kind of wondering, because what it does in the game is it gives everybody a +1 to hit within 18 inches, all your allies anyway. I always wondered, I was like, how exactly does it do that? Because it's like just goblins on its back with like a drum, and I'm like, all right, I guess. The story behind it's kind of neat because they bang the drums to the beat of Cragnose's hoofs. It's more of an amplification of Cragnose.
Oh God, that's terrifying.
So as Cragnose is like pounding through wherever he's pounding, these goblins are beating these drums to the same exact beat, and that's what gives them the +1 to hit.
So it's basically just like
it like mimics his hoof beats, maybe in a psychic reverberation or something.
Yeah, it's already what's driving them. So this
we're going to talk a little bit about atrocities after this. Before that, I want to kind of talk about what my favorite models have been so far to put together, to paint from this range. I will say, I think the absolute best model that I just fell in love with as soon as I put it together was it's the Break-A-Boss on Myrebrute Trogoth. That guy is so cool looking. And the model is this big old trog, and the guy on top, and oh man, he is just nasty. I think it's so far been my favorite model.
Is that the model where the dude like yanks on the chains and like damages the dude but gives him extra attack?
Yes, it does. It says D3 mortal wounds. For each one you take, you get 2 extra attacks.
It's so nasty.
Very nasty. That's been my favorite one so far to put together in paint. Although I keep looking at that Marsh Crawler Slogoth, and that thing just looks so nasty. It actually looks like this thing is crawling maybe through a swamp or so. He looks sneaky almost.
Sneaky.
Yeah, and he's got the howdah on his back with the goblins, and the Grotts, and they're like all beating the drums and stuff. I definitely like them. What about you, Evelyn?
I have to say, my favorite, it's either the same, break a boss on the Troggoth, or, what was his name? The guy on the Vulture. He did some nasty stuff too.
There's a special guy on a Vulture, and his name is Gobsprak, and he's the mouth of Mork.
Yeah, his whole thing is like he does things. Like, you know, a vulture's like a scavenger. But I think it's a little more of like a just eats everything and it eats leftovers. It, you know, it can't waste good meat.
So the way that these things are hunted and the way they get them are so nasty. What the vultures will do, they will peck at the inside of a swamp tree until it becomes kind of bare and dies. And then what it'll do is it'll kill something, or it'll find something that's dead, and it'll impale it on the swamp tree and wait until the corpse gets really nice and ripe before eating it. It likes it nasty ripe, like terrible, disgusting.
Oh, that's just gross.
And so what this nasty ripe corpse will do is it will attract other things to the area to like feed, to try to feed off of it. And so the vulture will be just circling overhead, and it'll come down and get those things and kill them or wound them and put them on the spike. And pretty soon you've got just this enormous tree full of corpses that are sweltering in the swamp.
Oh, that's just, I feel like you just get like this clearing of it. You'd come upon and you'd be like, nope, other way.
Yeah. So the way that these orcs have to do it is they have to sneak up on this thing, and they have to find this meat, wherever's the rankest, rottenest meat there, and they have to poison it in a way that'll like make the corpse rip a vulture delirious.
Mm-hmm.
And while it's laying on the ground going, "Aah," they go up and just beat it into submission. Hope that they beat it into submission. Hope that they got the poison right. Keep in mind, this is a vulture. This thing is probably immune to most things. They have to brew up like some specific potion or something, because this thing eats rotten meat.
And really rotten meat.
Yeah, really nasty, disgusting rotten meat that's already infested with everything that the swamp has to offer.
Yeah, that'd have to be something real specific.
And then they beat it into submission.
Hopefully.
And so Gobsprak, he's got a whole bunch of different things. Like he's even his and then they put trophies on him to signify like their importance and how like great they are. And so like Gobsprak has the hand of a greater demon of Tzeentch.
Oh no.
And so when they die, they like wither away because they're made out of chaos, the stuff of chaos. But in this case, he willed it not to wither away, so that way he could show it to all his friends.
Oh my god.
And so it's kept in place by his will.
That's just some will right there.
Right? And it's just like a whole bunch of heads and of things that they've killed. And then he's got this little grot that has this mandrake root that screams and like deafens you and makes your ears bleed and maybe kills you.
Maybe kills you. I think that Grodd also has a knife that has stabbed me a couple of times and done more wounds than like his spear did one time.
Yeah, the backup stabber. Well, he's a caster, so he's not that great at stabbing you with his spear, or actually he has got a staff. He is so nasty. Oh, and you know what he also has, which actually made Renee really sad? Okay, so he's got the decapitated head of Methusai of Hollowheart, whose warding gestures were found wanting. So I guess like a caster of Hollowheart. And then this guy was eaten from the inside out by tapeworm squigs. It's disgusting. He's got the feather of a juvenile phoenix that's nailed to his trophy rack. And then the rest of the phoenix, he ate it raw.
Oh, that's just nasty.
And every once in a while, it gives him terrible indigestion. Fiery indigestion. Because it constantly dies and then is reborn inside of him.
Oh, yeah.
He also has he says he regrets it. The eyeballs of the 7 seers and a clutch of mind-expanding mushrooms that he harvested from Snazgar Stinkmullet's corpse. Renee's really upset that he killed Snazgar Stinkmullet. That was her jam.
Oh no.
It was the grot with the mushrooms growing out of his ears and growing out of his brain. He had like death cap mushrooms growing. He was pretty insane. Atop his gnarled staff is the mutilated hand of the Lord of Change known as Skainclaw, kept in the world of the living only by the shaman's fierce determination to show it off to his mates. I think that's so funny.
That's amazing.
He's got the skull of the Big Rippa, which is a super predator that hunted him until he cast the Foot of Gork and stomped him into the ground.
Oh my.
So can you imagine the Foot of Gork just comes down and stomps this poor super predator down until he dies from it? No, he kicked it to death. The way that their lore kind of works is there's a special character who is supposed to be this like really, really fantastic, the cruelest of the cruel, Borkuk the Sly, right? Borkuk the Sly was supposed to be like the greatest, sneakiest, most cunning green skin of all the Grinnin' Blades. Nobody wanted to challenge him because anybody who said stuff behind his back, he would like appear behind him and kill him with this great white sword.
Oh God.
His great white choppa for talking Giddish.
Talking Giddish.
And so one day, Gobsprak appeared behind him and was like, I'm the boss now. And this guy was like, yeah, you're the boss. Yeah, sounds good. See you later. No problem. I follow you now. And then a couple hours later, Cragnose came around, like teleported behind Gobsprak or in front of Gobsprak. And Cragnose was like, I'm the boss now.
Wow.
And so the reason why Gobsprak is called the Mouth of Mork is because he understands Cragnose's language. Nobody else understands him. So Cragnose had been leading pretty much by just like grunts and gestures because nobody could understand what he said. And so now he's got an interpreter. And so he'll speak to Gobsprak and then Gobsprak will tell everybody else what to do based on what he said.
Wow.
It's funny because if anybody gives him any lip, then Gobsprak just looks over at Cragnose and says, that guy said that he doesn't want to follow you anymore. He said that you're terrible. You're a poopy head. and also that you smell weird. Oh, and you're weak.
You're weak.
Yeah, you're weak. And then Cragnose just stomps this poor orc into the ground. And I can imagine Gobsprak like looking around like, anybody else have any other objections?
A couple others got like tangled up in the mess. They're just like looking
like, no, it's okay. So I think that's just about enough of these orcs, as fun as they are to talk about. I would love to get into talking about atrocities in the Age of Sigmar and how they match up to the atrocity that we're about to talk about. I'll start with what I consider to be the atrocity that these cruel boys actually commit. After that, we will talk about mostly order, because I mean, we understand that chaos, that's what they do, right? Destruction, that's pretty much, they kind of do atrocities, right? Death.
It's their middle name.
Yeah, death kind of is a weird thing because they don't typically do the whole atrocity thing, but like order should know better, right? An order army is specifically designed, or rather a nation is specifically designed to not commit atrocities, right? They're trying to keep order.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to talk a little bit about that, but first we're going to take a break. So I will see you in a little bit. All right, we're back, and we are going to talk about the Age of Atrocities, or the Age of Sigmar. Atrocities in the Age of Sigmar. I originally wanted to do this episode just on Cruel Boys, but after I was reading them for a little while, I was thinking to myself, well, are they truly the cruelest boys? Like, is there something that, like, are there atrocities that others may have committed, specifically like order factions, that may have gone even over the top for Cruel Boys? And I guess we should start by defining what I would consider to be an atrocity. I would say that it is an extremely wicked or cruel act done with little or no empathy and usually involving physical violence or injury. Although it could be mental, like there could be a mental aspect to it. You know, mental suffering is just as bad sometimes as physical suffering. But an atrocity, if I had to use a couple of words to define it, I would say that it could be described as like barbaric and brutal, savage, wicked, cruel, and usually promotes some sort of outrage and wickedness. Like you would think to yourself, oh, I'm outraged about this. This is outrageous. You know what I mean? And the overall act has to show inhumanity as we view it. First, I want to talk about the Cruel Boys, what I would consider to be their atrocity. And I had to look pretty hard for this because almost everything that a cruel boy does could theoretically be considered an atrocity, but it's just how they are. That's how they were made, kind of like how chaos is. Like pretty much chaos is there to end empires. It's there to break down the foundations of society. So technically, all of chaos would be an atrocity. So what did these guys do? What could these cruel boys possibly have done in the past that's like stepping over the line even for them?
Because their nature, which is what they do, like it's what you expect them to do. And I have a feeling an atrocity is something that's like over the line. You wouldn't expect it.
Yeah. So one day, a bunch of cruel boys snuck down into Shyish, and they went down and found an underworld in Shyish before the Age of Chaos that had a bunch of bugs in it. It was like an afterlife for people who like thought bugs were great because they were industrious and worked hard or something. And then what the cruel boys did was they took it over. They branded the bugs with their clan signs, and they just completely desecrated this afterlife, pretty much. So the way that I would view it is, let's say you're a Viking, right? And you die in battle and you go to the Viking afterlife, which you believe you'll spend eternity feasting and battling and, fighting armies of the enemies. And then you get there and it's just these smelly swamp orcs that have taken over everything. And they've like spattered the feasting table with like poop, and they pissed in all the water and the wine, and they like made everything all nasty, and everything's all swampy and muddy, and there's just like crap everywhere. They like enslaved all the rest of your like barbarian tribes and that are supposed to be fighting the afterlife. And then they also enslaved all the guys you were supposed to be fighting against. And you show up and they're like, oh, good, you're mine now.
Another one.
Yeah. Another one for my personal, repertoire of bugs and crap. I feel like that is messed up. That is an atrocity. They didn't just come in and kill everybody, because that's what they normally would do anyway. They came in and they fouled an afterlife. So these people who are maybe just slightly sentient bugs who were industrious and did everything they were supposed to do and were like, oh, I'm going to go to a nice afterlife. Nope. You're going to be some skullbug boys, like treasure or something. He's going to use you in battle.
Or lunch. We don't know which.
Yeah, or lunch. Because they, like, one of the things that they do is they take particularly venomous bugs and then they'll crack them between their teeth, suck out their venom, and spit it in a bowl, and then ride the delusional coma for 2 days.
Gross.
And mind you, it definitely destroys the thing in the process. So that's the bar right there. You step up to the pearly gates, and Peter is missing. You're like, God? And an orc steps out, and he's like, yup, get into the chain gang. You go down to hell.
He's got like a really bad fake beard on.
So you're like, no. And you jump down into hell. You get in line to start like getting into hell. And the devil is like, the devil is being ridden by a break-a-boss orc. And he tugs on the harness. Is like, oh yeah, smash that guy.
Mm-hmm. That guy said you were weak.
Yeah. Right. So you could just imagine how just taking over an afterlife like that's so terrible. That's the bar.
So we've already really covered the Stormcast Eternals in episode 4 or 5.
This is episode 4, I think.
And it ranges from when the Knights Excelsior mercilessly dragged off anyone who seemed suspicious or were just magic users, to be fair, to the Celestial Vindicators murdering 3/4 of the city in a night to put out a riot.
I'd say those are both atrocities, right?
Yeah, they all seem pretty horrible.
Like, if you have a riot in your city and your response is to kill 3/4 of everybody in that city in one night, that's an atrocity. Like, you're not supposed to be doing that, right?
Yeah. You also talked about how the Sons of Malice and how they take pleasure in hunting, torturing, and killing their victims. That has a hint of war crime in it. Even if they hunt evil things, it's still a little bit on the border.
Yeah, and let's be clear about this Knights Excelsior thing. It's totally 1984. It's totally like thought crimes, and anybody that even seems suspicious gets dragged away, and you are expected to like tattle on your neighbors, even if it's not exactly true. It's like, oh, well, they're a little bit suspicious, and therefore drag them down and torture them to death. That's pretty brutal, right?
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting atrocity.
But the Sons of Malice, I don't know if you would consider it an atrocity, but let's say that you had something terrible happen in your village. Let's say some robbers came in and they stuck up the bank, robbed some money, maybe like beat up a guy, and then they left, right? Or maybe they even shot and killed a guy and left. But in this example, let's say they beat up a guy. And then the Sons of Malice came in and you're like, hey, you reported it to them. You said, okay, well, these are the outlaws and this is the bounty, blah, blah. And they were like, yeah, I can't wait to get my hands on them. And so then you're like, okay, buddy, hope you get them. And then you go off like, let's say you get a letter that says, okay, we'll come to this place, signed Sons of Malice. So you come to this place and you find out that they hunted these people down, they tortured them, they skinned them alive, they like did every nasty thing to them, and then eventually killed them and like hung their bodies up, and it's obvious that they like took pleasure in the whole bit. And you get there and these like Stormcast Eternals are just laughing and playing with this one last guy who they eventually catch and start peeling like strips of skin off of them. And you're like, dude, I know these are criminals and stuff, but holy crap, this is sadistic, right? Like that's an atrocity.
Yeah, that's like, I have a feeling like it's not just the actual act of it, but enjoying it. It's pretty bad.
Yeah. Right. So that's this is Stormcast Eternals. You know, that was a lot of atrocities for Stormcast Eternals.
Yeah, they have a pretty messed up history.
Definitely. And for Cities of Sigmar, you know, there are the witch hunters in Excelsis, that are burning and condemning at every step. You know, humans will be humans, and they will do that, and they drag people off, and that's kind of an atrocity, right? I mean, we talked about it earlier. It's like 1984-esque stuff.
Yeah, just like, oh, they look suspicious. I must be a witch.
Yeah, definitely. But then you get these other sort of mysterious entries like the living conflagration of sentient magic that swept across Hallowheart, which is a city of Sigmar known for its magical tendencies. Did they accidentally create this sentient magic, or did they create it on purpose and it got loose? Were they trying to like harness it and it got loose, or were they trying to like destroy it or create some sort of like sentient magical weapons? All we know is that the incident killed thousands in the lower city. So like literally thousands of people died here. And then 82 mages of the Collegiate Arcane before it was stopped. So if somebody did create this thing, even if it was by accident, I'd say that was an atrocity. Yeah,
it's pretty bad. It's like the same caliber of like setting off a, like, I don't know, accidental. You can't really accidentally set off a bomb. You can accidentally set off, but can you accidentally create a bomb to that caliber where I'm not sure if it was like an accident or if they purposely burnt it down or like.
But either way, a whole lot of people died.
Oh yeah,
right?
So many people died.
So that's kind of how that is. What about, you want to take Anvilgard?
Anvilgard's pretty much a den of thieves and, you know, cutthroats. It's a pretty efficient evil organization, though. According to their book, it says, Lord Veritas have not been dispatched to root them out. So they plot, scheme, murder, and act like pirates to do whatever they want. But as long as they are still marching to the beat of Sigmar's war drum, they are free to operate with impunity.
Yeah, so how does that make you feel that they can operate pretty much a criminal enterprise and do whatever they want as long as whenever Sigmar beats his war drum, they're like, yeah, sure, we're behind you 100%, buddy.
I have a feeling it's like they just don't care. Like a lot of Sigmar's history and a lot of the different things in Sigmar, it's like I don't really care as long as you don't like make as long as not a whole lot of people die, like not noticeable amounts, like people won't worry, and as long as you fight with us, you're on our fighting side. mean, in the Age of Myth, he got a whole bunch of people to do his dirty work.
That is true. I agree. So this isn't like necessarily outside of the scope of what Sigmar would allow, but still it feels bad because you've got like a bunch of outlaws, cutthroats, and when you think about what an evil organization can do to a government when it's like, pretty much this is a banana republic here. These government officials are being influenced by this shadowy organization that's like a mob almost.
Yeah, it's the mafia.
Yeah. And they have to get up to some pretty terrible things because they're very efficient, which means they'll just kill whoever it is that they think is not.
Two people can't keep a secret.
Yep, that's exactly correct. They're like, you don't want to legislate in our favor? Sucks to be you and your family.
And maybe some random kid just goes.
Anybody that sees anybody else. I mean, yeah. And also, you have to understand that they also trade in captured and tortured monsters for either their parts or their prowess in battle. And so what they'll do is they'll get a monster and, like, say, Charybdis. If they don't need the monster, then they'll kill it and sell its parts. Like its heart, its liver, its lungs, anything that's needed. Or just its meat, like giant slabs of its meat.
Yeah.
But if they don't kill it, they will drive it into a horrible frenzy and pretty much torture it. When they get to a battle, they'll like let it loose on the battlefield, all tortured, and they'll just prod it toward the enemy, and there you go. If it dies, they'll just sell its parts. They don't care.
Yeah,
that's kind of cruel, right? That's definitely cruel. That promotes outrage when you hear, even when it's a monster, right?
Yeah, I mean, cruelty in its own way, of life, it is an atrocity.
It is, and even though Azurite law forbids slavery, the Black Ark Corsairs apparently have a workaround. So they are trading in slaves.
Somehow, some way.
Though the book didn't go into detail about exactly how. If they found a workaround, then that means that they are trading slaves.
Yeah.
Slave trading it's
pretty terrible.
I would consider that to be an atrocity, right? It is, in my opinion, the theft of not just your life, but the theft of your ancestors and then also your children. Neither one of them are free to your ancestor. If you make, like, let's say take our family, right? We've got a mother, a father, and then 3 kids. If you take us into slavery, then you have undone everything that our parents and grandparents have worked for us and we've inherited through them. You've stolen all of my children's future, and then you've also stolen my own future. And then God knows what you might actually do with us. Yeah. Not to mention all of our stuff, but property and what have you. But it's kind of like, I don't know, it just feels really, really terrible, right?
Yeah, it's in itself is really wrong.
And then even if we do manage to like get out of this type of this bond, let's say we escape, where are we going to go? We can't go back to where we were taken because they now have all our stuff, and we have to literally start 100% fresh, like 100% with no resources, no friends, no family, nothing. So it's very difficult. It's weird because when you think about slavery, it really takes a lot more than just you or just your life.
It takes like pretty much everyone around you.
Yep. So I consider that to be pretty atrocious, right? That's pretty terrible.
Yeah.
And then, okay, so let's talk about Fire Slayers now, because Fire Slayers have had sort of a sordid past. They are pretty traditional in that they'll fight for your gold, but they've also done things like helped a Chaos Warlord named Magarak destroy an entire empire for Urgel. They went to this city or this nation full of people, and they used their magma droths to melt the walls. So that way the Chaos Lords could go in and just slaughter everything.
Yeah, it's pretty atrocious.
I wouldn't say the act is an atrocity, because there are acts like that happen all the time, right? You get the siege of a city, and once that happens, people go in and they get murdered.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily out of line for what happens, but what's out of line is that they're working with chaos. They're working with a chaos general to do this. They know that when they accept that Urgold, that there is no way the people in that city are going to do anything except for come to a messy end.
They know that unless they did something for chaos, like, I know this is sort of a taken back. They helped him destroy this empire, this entire empire. This is not like a city. It's an empire.
Yeah, so imagine that they helped them destroy all of Texas.
All of Texas.
All of Texas. Just as an example, just because it's big. That's only, and it's got multiple cities and lots of rural areas and everything like that. So let's say that these guys, in exchange for Urgold, just decided, oh, we'll just destroy that entire state, right? Which is an empire to these people.
Yeah.
And they knew it's not like it's their neighbor who might just take them over and, force them into a certain rule of law in one way. This is chaos. So they know that they're just going to come in and destroy everything, raise it to the ground, salt the earth, burn everything, people included, and they just didn't care.
Chaos is chaos. They do pretty much what you expect them to do.
Yeah, so that's definitely, it felt out of character, for an Order army. But what's also out of character is what Evelyn's going to talk about next, the Fire-Blooded Brothers of the Fearntan Lodge.
So they gave into their Urgold hunger, their addiction, and murdered and desecrated their way through other forge temples and consumed the gold runes off of the remains of their brothers. It took 12 other lodges acting in unison to bring them in. That's a lot. It's a lot of other lodges.
So you can imagine when they pound these runes into their chest, it's like an addiction, like a drug, and it feeds and it feeds and it feeds. And then the need gets stronger and stronger. And these people, normally a Forge Father helps them temper this, and their own resiliency helps them temper this need. And they're like, no, I'm only going to have as much as my brother has and, those beside me. So he kind of meets out how much Urgold gets stamped into everybody's body through these etchings, or they consume it. And I guess these people murdered their Forge Father, went on a killing spree.
Yeah. I have a feeling it's probably really hard to manage. One slip up and they could just go crazy, murder a bunch of people, eat them.
And when I was reading this battle tome, this is one thing that I really, really loved. I love the thought that they could descend into cannibalism just because of this Urgold dependency. It had a real flesh eater quartz vibe about it.
It does sort of have that same vibe of they think they're noble, they're an Order thing. They think they're noble, but it's a little chaotic down there.
It's definitely crazy. Okay, so then we get to, that isn't even the worst part. The worst one, from these guys at least, I think is the Hermder Lodge, who murdered all of the 7 crystal cities and salted their lands because after they defended their lands against chaos, the leaders wouldn't pay them the Urgold that they promised them. So when you think about this, I would maybe support them destroying the ruling council, right? Wouldn't that make sense? Oh, you're not going to pay us? We'll just kill you all. And maybe the next ruling council will pay us.
Yeah,
right?
that doesn't seem out of character.
Because they could. Obviously, they definitely could. But killing every single man, woman, and child and living being, including all of their livestock, all of their animals, their entire society in 7 cities, and then murdering their whole civilization, destroying it all, burning it, and salting the earth, that feels like an atrocity.
Yeah, that seems over the line.
Definitely over the line.
They could have just it doesn't really seem like them, but they could just nicely ask, be hey, the next council that comes around, to be hey, could you give us this Urgold?
Now, I'm not saying that they shouldn't have resorted to violence here, but killing these cities hold hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah,
so
it's a lot of people.
They destroyed the entire civilization, and there's 7 of them. That feels like an atrocity here. I know they didn't get what was owed to them. They didn't get what was promised. How is that really the fault of every single child in every one of those cities?
Yeah, I have a feeling they would have done better if they just stole it than if they...
No, they should not have stolen it. That feels like... a dwarf would never have done that.
But murder all 7 cities down to every living thing that
I wouldn't
existed.
say a dwarf would do that either, but what I could see them definitely doing is murdering everybody in charge.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
Murdering their whole government, and then waiting until they install another government and say, okay, do you guys want to pay us? Because that would have made a much better impact on the society at large and the entirety of the human population nearby. Because all of a sudden it would be like, well, if you don't pay these guys, then they will destroy everybody who has power. Anybody who has that decision to make, they will murder you hard.
And then wait.
And then wait. One thing I noticed about people who have a lot of money is that they tend to they want to keep that money, but they want to keep their own life intact a lot more than that money. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I feel like if the new ruling council knew that was what was going to happen until they got what was promised them, then they would definitely have given them that, the Urgold. So that's the Fire Slayers. They're a little bit messed up.
Yeah, it's just a little bit.
But so now we're going to talk a little bit about the Daughters of Cain, because their entire race feels like an atrocity. They get up, commit an atrocity, eat breakfast, probably blood of the atrocity they committed before this. They repeat the process until they're too tuckered out from atrocities and dream about the atrocities that they'll commit tomorrow. And that is essentially Daughters of Cain.
That's them in their entirety. That point.
But when you think about who they are, how they were made, who they were made in the image of, and what they worship, then it's kind of like the Cruel Boys, where you have to take them in a different light, because they're going to be killing people, but there has to have been a couple of instances that are considered to be like above and beyond, right?
It's over the line.
Yeah, over the line. And so I would definitely say one time that they were over the line, or specifically Morathi is over the line, was when she allowed an enormous civil war to break out, and then she allowed it to spiral out of control just to weed out potential rivals and thin the herds. She was like, oh, this big civil war is breaking out? Let me just make it worse and fan the flames. And then she used it to destroy possible rivals, and she's like, well, anybody that was killed, they were too weak anyway.
An event that is known as the Atrocity at Excelsis, they don't speak about it a whole lot. However, it's odd, since Excelsis is already a really, really extreme place, like a really extreme area. They must have done something so exceptionally terrible to earn that moniker in that place. Also, in the Age of Myths, she had her covens wipe out a ton of barbarian tribes near some greenskins, and then lied to Sigmar, saying that they were like corrupted and probably had some chaos in them.
Yeah, so right now, what we talked about, what we already considered to be an atrocity happening at Excelsis. What did she do in the past that is specifically called the Atrocity at Excelsis? How bad could that have been? It must have been pretty awful, right?
It must have been.
Those poor barbarian tribes. The Daughters of Cain were supposed to just go down and kill all the greenskins, right? And they were like, well, there's some barbarian tribes down here. We'll just kill them too. And they were like, no problem, Sigmar. They were corrupted by like chaos or something. And Sigmar was like, right. But I get the feeling Sigmar couldn't really do much about that. So that definitely feels like an atrocity.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of Sigmar can't really do much about it.
Yeah, his hands are really tied through he doesn't choose his friends very well.
It really doesn't.
Like Dracothia, no problem. That was a solid alliance. Solid first alliance. But then everybody else, yeah. Oh, so then what she did was she sent a lot of the war covens across the realms in search of these things called the Shards of Cain. But the entire time that they were on all these holy missions where they went across all 8 realms and like slaughtered and destroyed and murdered their way across the realm, Morathi had the only other Shard of Cain that still existed. She lied to her people and sent them out to murder indiscriminately on a fool's errand. And for what reason?
And she knew, like, she was like, this is mine. I have one, but this is the last one. So she must have either been like, oh, I wonder, or she must have just been like, I like killing.
Yeah, I feel like she knew, mm-hmm. Because when she went to go get the Heart of Cain, the Iron Heart of Cain, she had to fight the god of Charybdis's, and she changed into this like snake form and coiled around it and like strangled it.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, so nobody knows if it's alive or not. She's pretty nasty. That feels like an atrocity, right? If you, like, let's say you send out hundreds of bands of murder warriors out to find like the Holy Grail, but you already had the Holy Grail like locked in a room behind them like the whole time. You're like, no, go out and murder your way across the land. Find this Holy Grail for me. Yes, sir, boss. And
they just kill everybody looking for it.
That's crazy. So a little bit of a change is we're going to pivot to the Ideneth Deepkin, who, I mean, we already know that they commit what might be considered atrocities because they steal souls, but at least they have to do it. They can't like not do that, right? They have to prey on somebody. Usually it started with ships, and then let me give you a little bit of background. When the Ideneth Deepkin fled under the ocean, they decided to set up their cities, and they said to themselves, we'll have children. And unfortunately, 99 out of 100 children that they had were born with these shriveled souls and were like aborted. And elves aren't exactly very, like, they don't exactly procreate very quickly, mostly because their goddess of abundance, of like being able to procreate, is captured and in Nurgle's garden. Nurgle captured her.
Oh, gross.
They already procreate very slowly, and then these ones, 99 out of 100 of them just were born with shriveled, useless souls. So what they found was they needed to consume the souls of other living sentient beings. They tried to use undersea creatures, like big undersea behemoths, and it kind of worked, but not really. But then by chance, one of them happened to suck the soul out of like a sentient creature, sentient living being, and it worked like 1,000 times better or something. Like it was really, really so much better. That's not the atrocity, by the way. This is just background to the atrocity. So once Teclis created them and sort of he found out that they had these like kind of corrupted souls a little bit because they were in Slaanesh. He created this lantern and it was called the Light of Truth. And then he just kind of turned it on. And what the Light of Truth did was it tortured their entire race. All of a sudden, as soon as this Light of Truth was on, which I believe it was sort of like a light of Hish that was trapped into a lantern, it burned them and made them crazy, drove them crazy. The whole race, every single one of them.
That's just awful.
So much so that they fled to the depths of the oceans to try to get away from this. And for many of them, it just made them insane. That's an atrocity.
Yeah.
In my opinion, because Teclis made these people, and then he made something that tortured them. And he was like, oh, don't worry, some of you might get better.
Yeah, I feel like that's an atrocity on Teclis himself.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Like, and they did eventually steal this thing. And it's funny because Marathi stole it back from them recently and then used it to lure them into attacking a city to get it back. And they were like, wanted this thing back. They were like, nope, we have got to get it back. Doesn't matter if every one of you dies, we have to get this thing back. I feel like that's on Teclis. That is an atrocity on Teclis. And, you know, I could talk a lot about indolence and indulgence and the Lumineth Realm Lords. They may have committed atrocities on the land, but this is something that is way out of character, right? Like this should never have happened.
No, it doesn't seem like you imagine Teclis, you imagine this like really bright, like, I don't know, bright being. Somebody who's like really like well known, and he makes these people and then does this like really awful things to them, and you don't really expect it's out of character.
And mind you, this was solution number 2 after his solution number 1, which was he just wanted to kill every one of them.
Maybe he wasn't the one who's supposed to be making these
I know, right? Like maybe he's not the best, most balanced person to be making races of people. So it's funny because Tyrion actually talked him out of killing all of these people. he was like, well, brother, we did just make them. Maybe we shouldn't kill them all. And Teckles was like, no problem. I got you, brother. Instead, I'll just torture them until they're insane. Or they get better. One or the other.
Yeah, some will get better. That's the good part. It's like, his brother's like, but like 2 of them out of the entire population.
Yeah.
And even they don't like it.
I couldn't imagine that. Although the Deepkin did commit what I would consider to be an atrocity. Not just that they stole souls and used them. That's like what they need to do to survive. They're kind of like soul-blight vampires almost, right?
Yeah.
But what they did was they went up to this dwarf hold and they killed half of them. And I'm guessing stealing their souls in the process. Yeah. And then they put the other half into a coma by stealing their souls while they were still living.
Ew.
Never to awaken. So I'm guessing they didn't need to do that. They could have just like killed them, right? And if you think about it, like if they did this to exactly half of the dwarfs, then that means that the dwarfs must have like surrendered at some point. Probably. They must have said, okay, let's go ahead and treat with you. What do you want? Or maybe they decided, okay, we'll be, let's treat. And the Deepkin were like, sure, go to sleep and we'll steal everybody's soul.
Yeah. I have a feeling it may have been like hey, I'll give you half of my army and you let me go. And they were like, sure, half of your army.
Well, they killed the other half.
Yeah, like one half was probably like the ones that sleep. They like willingly came over, alive. Another half they probably just like killed.
But can you imagine the other dwarfs, like say their cousins, come over to their hold, and they come inside, and there's all of these comatose dwarves that'll never awaken again, and they hadn't touched a single ingot of gold. They hadn't stolen anything else from them.
Ugh.
They hadn't left any. They dragged away their dead, so there's no way for them to tell the dwarfs to tell that the Idoneth Deepkin were there. They were just left with half of a sleeping city, essentially. So then they would have this horrible moral quandary of like, do we put these dwarfs to death, or even worse, these dwarfs are going to like slowly starve in a coma,
mm-hmm.
and nobody has the resources to hand feed and water half of a city. Even in our modern times, we wouldn't be able to do it. So they had to either let them starve to death or in their sleep, or give them a messy end. Yeah.
The feeling they also had that moral question of, are they even alive at that point?
Yeah. So that's definitely an atrocity if I ever saw one, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Weirdly enough, I couldn't find any instances where the Caradhran overlords committed any atrocities. So if you know of one, please let me know. They do wage war, they kind of backstab, and they are very weird over small details. And the other dwarfs do say, read the contract 10,000 times before signing with the Caradhran overlords, which means that they kind of can't be trusted. But their laws forbid them doing anything too overly heinous to each other or pretty much to other races. I'm sure they've probably wiped out their fair share of greenskins, but that's like not necessarily an atrocity. Like I wouldn't consider them wiping out greenskins or greenskins wiping out them atrocities, right?
Yeah, it's
because that's just war.
It just happens.
Like that's war for survival between two races that hate each other. It's kind of like you can't hate the lioness who kills the hyenas to feed their young, and you also can't hate the hyenas who steal the lioness's cubs and kill them all while the lioness is out. That's kind of like nature. They're battling over territory, right? And food and everything.
Survival.
Yeah. So for the orcs and the dwarfs or the Caradhran overlords, it is kind of survival for them to go to war with each other and wipe each other out. It's not like they aren't doing it like, say, the Idoneth Deepkin did to those dwarfs just to like leave half a city's worth of sleeping dwarves, comatose dwarves.
Mm-hmm.
That's just, it's what you would say shocking and evil and horrible, Now they did stand by sit and just watch Stormcast Eternals lose battles at the beginning of the Age of Sigmar because they were like bound by contract. But that same contract that bound them to sit there and watch a losing battle also made it so that they didn't wipe out 3/4 of a city in one night. They didn't go over and destroy whole civilizations.
They didn't let a rebellion happen to, kill off their rivals.
Yeah. I feel like a failure to act isn't like murdering a bunch of their own kin due to a rebellion or, like becoming crazy with Urgold and eating a bunch of your own fellows, right? It's just not the same. So it's kind of a false dichotomy. So if you can find anything about the character Nervalers, let me know, but I really couldn't find much. What about the Seraphon?
The Seraphon did leave their Stormcast allies to die so that they could go destroy a silver tower through this realm gate. But that was less of an atrocity and a little bit more like cold logic. If you think about it, everything they've been told about Stormcast Eternals, they're eternal. They die, they're just reborn, and if it served a good purpose, then it was probably worth considering.
Yeah, remember, this was a sacrifice in battle. It's not like they just turned and left their allies to die for no good reason. They had a good reason, which is they wanted to strike and destroy that one silver tower that they saw and they knew was there. And they reasoned that the Stormcast Eternals could just be remade. Because, we know that Stormcast Eternals have problems, but they don't necessarily know that.
Yeah, I have a feeling, like you were talking about in the actual Stormcast podcast, they keep a lot of their secrets secret. Like a lot of the races think that, they're mighty powerful. You defeat a Stormcast Eternal. It's like, wow, that's a superhuman. They get reborn, but it's all right. But there's a lot of problems.
Definitely. Now, one thing that I kind of liked about the Seraphon, they do have these little biospheres in their ships where they let their young grow up, and they act like little Darwinistic proving grounds where the weakest get eaten and the strongest survive. And they just sit back and watch. And then they take the strongest and make them into warriors to fight wars. But I don't feel like that's really an atrocity.
As much as it's just kind of morally skewed a little bit, but morals vary based off of the person. But
this is real, again, more cold-blooded logic, because if they needed, as humans, we tend to value each and every single life because we think of that life as that one person that came before them. But they might not think of it like that just because, A, they might not even be sentient at that point. They might just be animalistic. Mm-hmm. Or B, it's like, okay, well, if you lay a clutch of 100 eggs but you really only need 3 good warriors, wouldn't you kind of just let them, kill each other off?
Yeah, it's kind of like in nature how there's that kind of natural selection. The only example I can think of right now is with turtles when they
the turtles.
Sorry, it's just really odd, but when they're walking across the beach, if there's no implications with the city and stuff, then they just sort of waddle across, and the fastest get across, and if you get picked off, then you get picked off. But
by seagulls and every predator under the sun.
Crabs, yeah. But if you make it across, then you're probably going to live. You have a much higher chance of living once you get into the water.
Yeah. So I kind of view the Seraphon in almost the same way that I view the Sylvaneth. They're kind of more animalistic than anything else. They're neutral. If they're hungry, they eat. If they are, if there's something in their territory, they'll kill it. But otherwise they probably wouldn't just kill, let's say, a pack animal just for the pleasure of it, right? They would consider it to be just resources lost.
Yeah, it's why would you do that? We might need that.
We know that the Sylvaneth and specifically the branch wraiths will spitefully kill anybody that enters their territory with no regard for pity or mercy, but is that really an atrocity, or is that just them defending their territory because they know, hey, humans have come here in the past and they come to burn and chop. Orcs have come here in the past and they've come to burn and chop. Chaos has come here in the past and they come to do maybe even worse things.
Burn and eat.
Every single person that comes to their forest usually just wants to like chop it down and use it for firewood or use it to make stuff. And I have a feeling that if there was a race of people or things that wanted to come over and like chop our hands off and use them to make things, we'd be like, no, we're going to kill every one of you that tries to come over and chop us down and make us into like flesh palaces.
Flesh palaces.
Yeah, like, can you imagine
gingerbread houses?
Yeah, flesh gingerbread houses. If there's a guy that's like, no, listen. We only want like 20 or 30 of you. And we're like, what? No, you can't have even one of us. And they're like, well, you're just big flesh human trees, right? And we're like, that doesn't matter. We think and feel and are. That's my wife over there. And the guy's like, it just kind of looks like an oak tree to me. So there's definitely a little bit of a divide there.
Yeah, I feel like it's a lot of they don't want to die, so just killing anything that they think is going to be harmful to them, sort of, I think you said, animalistic.
Yeah, it's a good response, right? Everything wants to kill them. Everything wants to chop them down, burn them up, and use them for firewood and to make stuff, and that's pretty awful. Let me ask you then, of all the atrocities that we just talked about, which one do you think is the worst? Is it still the Cruel Boys?
I'm not so sure if it's still the Cruel Boys. Like, the Cruel Boys, yeah, they messed up an entire afterlife. That's pretty bad. But if there had to be one that was over them, it might have to be... It's definitely one of the Sigmar ones, because it's so odd that Sigmar is so messed up. Like, maybe the atrocities seem bigger because they're supposed to be so noble, so any atrocity feels like a really bad. But also, like, the Fire Slayers, that one faction that just, like, ate their brothers, that's pretty bad, too.
Pretty terrible.
I feel like they're all atrocities, and they're all pretty much on the same level of, like, that's pretty bad. Probably shouldn't do that.
Yeah. Definitely, I would always say we shouldn't do any one of those things. We should definitely not do that. But if you had to pick one,
if I had to pick one,
there's no wrong answers here. They're all pretty terrible.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't want my answer to influence your answer. That's why I'm asking you to go first.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I have mine set in my head. Which one I pick?
I think actually, as much as I didn't talk about this one. When Marathi was like, here, there's this shard that's like that I only have. Go murder people for looking for it.
And then she sent hundreds and hundreds of war covens out to just murder their way across the land.
Yeah, and it's like all the realms, so it's like so many things.
That was pretty awful. I will say that is a good atrocity. Good atrocity. Let's see. I'm going to pick the Fire Slayers, but not the one that you were talking about. I'm picking the one where they destroyed all 7 crystal cities.
Makes sense.
Murdered an entire civilization because the ruling council wouldn't pay them.
Has a similar energy.
Yeah, like murdering a civilization. Like when you think about what in our history, like if you go all the way back to history and prehistory, what would have been the most ruthless acts by a ruling body? Or like a government or a nation or a people, it probably has to be the Assyrians, because they were absolutely awful. Yes, they were absolutely ruthless. If you did not do what they wanted, then they would just come in and kill every single one of everybody in your nation. And a lot of times they would start with the rulers, and work their way down.
Yeah, because I have a feeling it's a lot easier if you get rid of the top and then sort of work your way down.
Yeah, and that feels like this. This like when you destroy a nation of people, that takes a lot.
It takes work.
Yeah, it's not just work, but they burned everything. They made sure nothing existed from this civilization. Salted the earth. They destroyed all of their architecture. Burned all of their scrolls, any books that they possibly had, centers of learning, their history, pretty much. They were like, okay, we're going to take your past, present, and future and out the window.
Yeah.
That is pretty awful.
Really over the top.
Yeah.
And I feel like they must have spent more resources than they would have gotten from that.
Definitely.
Like, they probably spent more year gold than they actually probably would have gotten just from like having.
Well, they don't
guys
spend
die.
it because when they die, they just cremate the body and get it back.
Oh yeah, that's right. They still spent
back.
resources.
But yeah, it's definitely resources, and it must have taken a long time.
Oh yeah.
You do not just murder a civilization in like
7 of them.
Seven cities. It's pretty terrible. So those are the atrocities, and that's what I would consider. That was actually the question for today. The question and answer was, which atrocity do you think is actually the worst in Age of Sigmar? And I know we've talked about a pretty weird and horrible subject, but it's mentioned very casually in these books. And they, like, a lot of times the books from GW talk about great battles, and they talk about the things that a civilization does and how it builds up. But then every once in a while it'd be these little gems of things that are just so horrible when you contemplate exactly what happened here in a way that is inhumane. We would not consider doing it to each other. I'm brought back to when we dropped an atomic bomb. After we saw what happened there, we were shell-shocked. We were not, as the people who dropped it, we were just absolutely mortified by what we had done, right?
Yeah.
And as a society, just as a people, we were like, oh my God, this is awful. And to have something happen in even a war game that is just cruel, inhumane, that conjures up levels of resentment that might exist for thousands of years is just, it's heartbreaking almost, right?
Yeah, and in the books, like you were saying, it's brought up almost not quite casually, but really they don't ever make a big deal out of it, which makes sense, especially with some of the order things. Like some of these, when I first learned about these armies, I knew the Fire Slayers, they were addicted to this Euro, but I wouldn't think they would, burn and kill and absolutely pillage these entire 7 cities. It's something that I think they gloss over, and they don't make a big deal out of it because, it's not what they're, it's not what they're...
So, this doesn't define the society. We're just talking about a slight atrocity that happened in the past. And you're like, what? Excuse me? What? It's weird because it almost feels like a footnote in their history rather than something that would define a culture.
Yeah.
I'm trying very hard not to use recent cultures or cultures of human civilization that are still countries. That's why I went back to the ancient Assyrians, because the Assyrians, nobody's going to be like, oh my God, I'm so offended. I was an Assyrian, or my father was an Assyrian. Not a big deal. Not a big deal. Those are people that died and they're gone, right? I can talk about that. So when we think about what they did, it defines them as a nation. They were particularly bloodthirsty. They had a tree that had severed heads of monarchs on it.
Yeah, it's instead of a footnote, it's an entire chapter or the title of their book.
Yeah. When people would come to treat with them, they would sit them in a lobby, and the lobby would have tapestries of Assyrians killing people and disemboweling them and putting them to torture.
Sounds like
so this is what these people would look at while they were waiting to see the ruling body.
Oh yeah, that's definitely a power move right there.
Yeah. So this is what defined the entirety of that nation and of that nation's history. When we read about them, we don't necessarily read about their goals, their aspirations, any great leaps in technology that they may have had. We think about these things. And even the Persians that came after them, the Persians who were they were so much less bloodthirsty. The Persians would go up to somebody and they'd say, oh, well, you're good at doing this, so we're going to co-opt you into our kingdom, and not a whole lot will change. You can still rule, but we just need whatever it is that you're good at, and we need you to just give that to the Persian Empire or sell it to the Persian Empire. They wouldn't say give it to them. They'd say sell it to them or teach us how to do it. That's kind of how the Persians acted But you could see, from the movie 300, they were described as these like bloodthirsty invading barbarians, right? Because of one atrocity on one nation.
Yeah, in like one instance.
One incident. But it didn't define their society, even though we've sort of typecast them like that.
Yeah, I have a feeling a lot of that probably also has to go with what happened, like what came before them. Because if they committed like one atrocity on one nation, it only happened one time. But before them were like these people that consistently committed atrocities. Like one would seem pretty terrifying because you're like, oh God, is this going to happen more?
Yeah. And with Age of Sigmar, these order factions, they're not supposed to be like this. They're not supposed to be committing these things. These atrocities, these horrible events that would in any other nation define them in the history books. In this one, it's just like a little footnote,
Yeah.
You just casually destroy nations.
Yeah, like I said earlier, it's a footnote, not a chapter.
Right. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up for this episode. Thank you so much for being on with me, Evelyn.
No problem. Thank you for letting me do this again. It was very nice.
Yeah, I really like talking with Evelyn about this kind of stuff. Well, not this kind of stuff, but about the lore and about everything else. And I hope you guys had, at least I hope it was informative and the Cruel Boy stuff was a little bit enjoyable. I can't wait to start painting up some of the rest of these models. And remember, hobby promises, right?
Hobby promises.
From the heart. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Have a good day.
What?
I don't know.
Have a good day.
I mean, like,
no, you're supposed to say, don't have a good day. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Seriously Narrative, a Warhammer podcast.
If you'd like to get in touch with us for questions, please email us at seriouslynarrativepodcast@gmail.com. We also have a Facebook page at facebook.com/seriouslynarrativepodcast. This episode of Seriously Narrative, a Warhammer podcast, is protected by the Creative Commons license. If you have any questions about the Creative Commons license, please visit their website at creativecommons.org. Music is provided by Incompetech, created by Kevin MacLeod, and used under the Creative Commons license. Thank you for listening.